This is the story of a girl. Her name is Toph, which sounds like tough, and that's just what she is. But don't let her fool you. Toph's rock-solid facade protects a vulnerable interior. Her professed self-confidence and self-reliance belies her need for guidance, assurance, and friendship. The core of Avatar: The Last Airbender's story is formed by the growth of its main characters, all of whom have to mature in some way or another. But Toph perhaps is the one who has to grow up the most. While Aang is undoubtedly the most childlike in his exuberant, fun-loving, and carefree nature, the burden of responsibility he carries, even if he stuffs it into the back of his mind at times, is something completely alien to Toph, whose life, when we first meet her, has been lived in two worlds. In one, she's cared for and doted on, kept safe from every possible danger or discomfort, even soup that is slightly too warm. In the other, she is the self-made champion earthbending duelist, relying on no one at all, but simply conquering through her own skill. If we place personal autonomy on a spectrum, Toph exists on both extreme ends, depending on whether she is at home with her parents or stepping into the arena of Earth Rumble 6. This is hardly surprising. Children desire independence well before they even know what the word means. And when they are denied it for so long and so forcefully, they will seize it wholeheartedly and without restraint should the opportunity to do so present itself. In the process, what gets lost is balance. Being completely sheltered and pampered is unhealthy, but so too is unmitigated lack of oversight or responsibility. That, of course, is the lesson that Toph has to learn during the chase, as she and Katara repeatedly clash over the newest member of Team Avatar's refusal to help out the rest of the group. At this point in her story, Toph could not comprehend the mere existence of acts of unconditional love, even simple ones such as lending a hand when unloading Appa. Every gift or act of love from her parents had come with a price, with a requirement that she stay their demure, obedient little girl who accepted her hidden life. And since she had never learned to receive such gifts, she couldn't very well comprehend the value in giving them. Every act in her life was transactional. Her parents kept her fed and clothed in exchange for her obeying them, publicly anyway, and in her earthbending career, every victory was won through her own self-taught skill. Yes, I know that she was first taught by badger moles, but that's beside the point. For Toph, there simply was no such thing as love given purely for the sake of another. The first time she encounters someone who acts in such a manner is, to no one's surprise, when she has tea with Iroh, who pours her cup of hot leaf juice despite her protest, because he wanted to, and for no other reason. It was such a small act of love, merely a kind gesture from one stranger to another, and yet it has a profound impact on Toph. This man who didn't know the first thing about her did something for her out of sheer and unadulterated kindness. As always, we look to Iroh for guidance. Freedom does not exist so that we can do whatever we want forever without anyone telling us to stop indulging ourselves in all of our hedonistic desires. Freedom exists for the sake of love. True freedom is not immunity from responsibility, but rather the ability to fulfill our responsibilities. Toph supposedly chose to run away with the gang in order to teach Aang earthbending, but this episode quickly revealed her stronger motivation: extrication from the oppressive rule of her parents. When her nerves got fed up with Katara badgering her, and Aang losing his temper when Toph blamed Appa's shedding for their sleepless night, Toph was quick to leave, her promise to train the Avatar forgotten in her pursuit of total autonomy. What's particularly beautiful about the lesson that Iroh teaches Toph here is that he provides for her a model of how she should have acted. Far too many kids shows try to have kids learn lessons directly, by having the character's bad behavior come with consequences that can only be remedied if they change their ways. That's not necessarily a bad thing, mind you, but it's quite simplistic and not nearly as effective if you ask me. After all, bad behavior is quite often consequence-free. It is far better for children to see good men and women providing examples of how they should act. As I said earlier, this is precisely what Toph had lacked, and what she now sees in Iroh, what inspires her to return to the group, and the promise she had made. A promise that turns out to be perhaps more challenging than she had anticipated. I am, of course, referring to the next episode, Bitter Work, in which Toph finds out that teaching earthbending to an airbender requires a significant shift in mindset, but not just for Aang. As much as he needs to learn to stand his ground and to stop looking for different angles or trickety tricks that will solve his problem, Toph needs to think like an airbender in order to properly teach one. That is, she is the one who has to find another way, another angle, to ensure Aang takes her lessons to heart. Toph could have just kept rolling boulders at him over and over again, yelling about him being a jelly-boned wimp repeatedly every time he dodged out of the way, but she doesn't. Heck, she even takes Katara's advice and gives Aang some positive reinforcement. Sure, it's just a nod, but coming from Toph, that means quite a lot. I point out this mutual exchange of lessons because it highlights a simple yet meaningful fact about the gang's dynamic. They all learn from each other. Their relationships all have give and take, with various members discovering their worth and the worth of their friends at different and unexpected times. Seeing as they are all kids, of course, none of them is the Iroh of the group, constantly dispensing wisdom without receiving insight in return. No member is a know-it-all despite Sokka's best efforts. None of them is right all the time, and none of them is a complete master of his or her given bending style. An unfortunate realization for Toph when they go out into the desert to visit the library, and she stays behind with Appa and then loses him to sandbenders who take advantage of her inexperience with this unfamiliar form of Earth, and her need to stop her friends from being buried alive in the sinking library. This is Toph at her lowest point. She had been brought into Team Avatar to teach Aang earthbending, and yet she found herself inadequate at the very art in which she was supposed to be an expert. It's hardly her fault that she didn't know how to sandbend properly, having not grown up in a desert, but that doesn't stop her shame, which largely manifests itself in her defensiveness when Aang gets mad about her failure to stop Appa's kidnappers, because Aang only ever gets mad on Appa's behalf. You know the line that's coming next, right? Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. Toph took great pride in being a supremely talented earthbender. It was who she was. It was the identity she had forged for herself when her parents wouldn't allow her outside the walls of their estate. She never wanted to feel as helpless as her parents assumed she was, but now she does. And she even has to rely on Katara of all people for guidance and ask her for her rations of water, though that's mostly because Sokka is just currently tripping on cactus juice. It helps that Katara had come to Toph's defense when Aang accused her of wanting Appa gone. Again, Aang tends to lose his monk mentality when Appa is in danger, and Toph depending on Katara is a wonderful way for the show to demonstrate that the two have a growing bond, that their conflict from a few episodes ago has been smoothed over. And yet they are of course still two drastically different people, as shown in the beginning of the tale of Toph and Katara, in which we find out that you can earthbend a spa attendant through a wall and still be welcome as a customer. Jokes aside, the real reason I bring up this episode is because of the conversation between the two heroines after Toph is verbally tormented by a trio of pretentious snobs. Toph tells Katara and herself, "I don't care what I look like, I know who I am," which clearly isn't 100% true since she just dropped her tormentors through a bridge into a stream over a few insults regarding her looks, which wasn't exactly the most mature reaction to their jibes. No doubt Toph hadn't cared about her appearance, or at least thought she didn't care, and then when it was insulted found out that it did actually matter to her, and that unpleasant discovery caused her to lash out. As I said at the beginning of the video, Toph is tough. She wants to be tough. She doesn't want anyone or anything to break through her thick outer shell. But once that metaphorical crack was opened by the words of the three nobodies, it gave Katara an opening to use that vulnerability to do what she does best: heal. Katara affirms Toph by telling her that she's actually really pretty, and the impact those words have on Toph's psyche is as clear as day. The opinions of those who are dear to us should matter, should affect us. Being vulnerable to those whom we love is not a weakness. That is life. It is freedom. If we close ourselves off entirely, we are merely slaves to our own sense of self-preservation, which of course isn't really preserving ourself, but rather our pride. Pride is what says, I don't need anyone, I am sufficient. Humility lets us admit that others matter. It frees us and lets us embrace love as we ought to. One of the things that Avatar does best is demonstrate the necessity and power of philia, that is, the bonds of brotherly or friendship love. Our modern world isn't the best at recognizing how badly we all need true, genuine platonic friendships, but the ones displayed in Avatar provide a powerful example of what such bonds should look like. The group is bound together due to a common interest and goal, one that is freely chosen. The love between the members of Team Avatar is largely not organic or biological. Aside from Sokka and Katara, none of them are related. None of them needed to accompany the Avatar on his journey, but they chose to do so. They chose each other. Not because they had something to gain, but because it was the right thing to do, because they had something to give, and then because they had come to care about the people they now call friends. Seeing Toph change from this isolated young girl whose only method of self-expression was beating up earthbenders twice her size, to someone who is genuinely moved by a simple compliment from her friend is truly heartwarming. It's one of the myriad of reasons this show has aged beautifully. However, do not let me give you the idea that just because Toph and Katara have shared an exchange of kind words that everything is hunky-dory between them now and forever. I also hope that I have not given the impression that Toph is now a fully mature individual who has completely outgrown her flaws. That wouldn't make for a particularly satisfying character arc, and Avatar does perhaps nothing better than show us that the journeys which its characters take are not smooth rides. They are not continuous, uninterrupted climbs up the mountain of virtue as our heroes get better and better with every passing chapter. A fact demonstrated by the conflict between Toph and Katara in The Runaway, in which Toph puts her specialized skills to use in a series of scams that provide the gang with food, money, and, most importantly, a messenger hawk for Sokka. Unlike a season earlier, Toph is now an integral member of the group, one who is more than willing to play her part and help out. The issue lies not with her selfishness, but rather with her risky decision-making. And when Katara points that out, the old Toph reemerges a bit. "You're not my mom, and you're not their mom," is her decisive proclamation when Katara tries to tamp down on their reckless scamming. This line is indicative of Toph's idea of what a mother is. Someone who is controlling. And that's pretty much it. Her own parents maintained an iron grip on her activities and whereabouts, or so they thought, in order to protect their own reputation and save their family from embarrassment. Toph has never experienced a mother or mother-like figure who cared about her for her own sake. While Katara isn't the greatest at expressing her concerns, she is, after all, just a teenager, there's no doubt that her main worry regarding the scams is that her brother and friends will get caught and come to harm. And Toph acknowledges this. In one of my favorite scenes of the whole show, Sokka sits her down and explains how Katara had to take on the role of a mother from a young age, and how, despite her annoying him at times, he relies on his sister's motherliness. Toph, in response, tells Sokka that she knows Katara genuinely cares for her. "That's more than my own mom," is how her confession ends. Those few words contain both an admission that Katara's maternal instincts are appreciated by Toph, and that she does in fact care about her own parents, a fact she vigorously denied earlier in the episode. A denial which careful watchers would immediately know to be false, as we saw Toph eagerly respond affirmatively to a letter supposedly from her father in Ba Sing Se asking her to meet. A fake letter, as it turned out, that led to her capture and eventual discovery of metal bending, but that's not really important right now. What matters is that in the latter half of The Runaway, we see Toph once again allow a crack in her rock-solid facade. We witness her admit that she does want and need loving care and guidance. Whether or not they admit it or even know it, children do desire proper direction and leadership from their parents. Keyword being proper, that is, rightfully ordered. Mr. and Mrs. Beifong's parental methods were obviously and seriously misguided, and it was no wonder that Toph cast them off. But the parent-child relationship is an irreplaceable one that, if destroyed, leaves an unfillable hole. For all Zuko's love for Iroh, his uncle could not fully take the place of Ozai. Unlike Zuko, however, Toph has a father who is misguided and selfish, not tyrannical and genocidal, so a path to the healing of her relationship with her parents could actually be envisioned. In asking Katara to write them a letter for her, in taking the first step to seek to rebuild the relationship she had torn down, Toph demonstrates wisdom beyond her years. A pattern that repeats itself when Zuko shows up in the Western Air Temple and asks to join the group. Toph is the only one who can sense his sincerity, and also the only one who hasn't gone toe-to-toe with him repeatedly. And even after he burns her feet, she remains willing to admit him into the gang. Sure, her earthbending lie detector is a bit of a cheat code, but it's far too easy for us to let our emotions overcome our sense of logic. If someone burned my eyes, even if it was an accident, I don't think I'd be as charitable to them as Toph is to Zuko here. But of course, that turns out to be the right decision, as Zuko then proceeds to teach Aang firebending and embark on life-changing field trips with Sokka and then Katara, which I mentioned because it leads to this moment in Sozin's Comet, when the gang splits up to search for Momo and Aang, and Toph insists that it's her turn to share such an adventure with Zuko. Toph is honestly quite mature by this point, her character development for the show more or less complete, and yet she still has a desire for growth and healing. Her attempt doesn't lead anywhere though, which just goes to show that you can't force a life-changing field trip, it has to happen organically. Nonetheless, Toph's immediate and emphatic choice of partner tells us something else, something more crucial. She now relies on others. She has come to realize that she cannot be truly independent, free from anyone's influence, if she is to be who she is meant to be. Incredibly powerful bender though she might be, Toph is reliant on the guidance and direction of others. She knows her skills and abilities, and now wants to put them into the service of others, of the whole world. She simply needs someone to guide her. Which, of course, we see in the airship battle as Sokka comes up with a plan, adapts it on the fly, and Toph carries out her role to perfection. Toph is far more than just a kick-ass earthbender. This video has focused on everything that makes her more than that, and yet she still is a consummate earth and metal bending badass. These scenes are exquisite because we witness the characters fulfill their potentials in combat. Sokka is a leader and tactician, Toph is a frontline brawler, and Suki is a creative and adaptable warrior. Team Avatar truly is a team. They each have an indispensable and critical role to play in that final battle, and for those who wade into the fray alongside their friends, that means supporting, encouraging, and directing them. When Sokka momentarily loses focus as he is separated from Suki, an understandable reaction, Toph has to snap him back to reality and make him realize that they've got to get going now. And this leads to some of my favorite shots in the whole show, depicting the pinnacle of Sokka's character arc and just how much Toph has grown and matured. Sokka shielding Toph with his own body as debris rains down around them, and then Toph dangling in midair hundreds of feet off of the ground, with only her grip on Sokka's hand preventing her from experiencing a long, long drop. A fall that perhaps most earthbenders could survive. I would think that someone like Bumi would be able to orient himself properly as he fell and make the earth cushion his fall. But could Toph? She would have no idea when she was going to hit the ground. Perhaps she would have some trick up her sleeve, but this is hardly a scenario for which she is prepared. Regardless, she certainly does not want to fall. But as she dangles there, helpless, the only words she utters are, "Aye, aye, Captain." What a change from the girl who repeatedly and proudly proclaimed that she could pull her own weight and take care of herself, by herself. This incredibly tough, skilled, and ingenious earthbender now places total trust in her friend. Toph grows in many ways throughout the course of her story. She realizes that she no longer wants to be alone, that relying on those who love her is not an impingement on her autonomy, and that only by opening herself up to her friends and loved ones can she be truly free.